Time to spend a few minutes with the hated by many, feared by some, but certainly not by you command, the IP default network command, and an excellent real-world tip here for you at the end of this particular video. But for right now, let's jump into its usage with propagating a default route through EIGRP. Now, in the previous video, what we did is took a static default route, or a default static route, whichever you want to call it, and we just injected that into EIGRP, all was well, but that's a default route, route to 0000. With IP default network, we can choose a particular network to be our default network and advertise that via EIGRP. But first we have to put it into EIGRP with the network command, and that's what I did here on the board in just a moment, or will do in just a moment, because what we're going to do is propagate the 20.0.0/8 network as the default. And right now, as you can see on router 2, there are no EIGRP routes. So we have to do two things. First off, I want to go back to the board for a minute because I'm going to yell in a way. And here's what I was going to yell about. You can advertise a non-zero network number with IP default network, but the router that originates this advertisement must have that network number in its IP routing table. So I'm using bold and italics. That's expensive, so you know I really mean this. And I really do. The reason I bring it up is because of default information originate always. And I might have had the dash in the wrong place when I showed you that earlier, but that's okay. Default information originate always in OSPF. That command allows a router under certain conditions to advertise a default route even when the router doesn't have a default route in its own table. So it can be a pretty handy command. We don't have that option with EIGRP. That's why I'm yelling about, the router originating this ad must have that network number in its IP routing table. So now back to router 1. We'll just look at the ginormous table here, down to two routes, both of them directly connected, and we see 20.0.0/8 there is the first connected route. So we need to do two things, and it really doesn't matter in which order you do these as long as you do them both. First, you've got to advertise this route via EIGRP with the network command. Then you've got to tag it, if you will, with the IP default network command, tag it as the candidate default. So let's do router EIGRP first, 20.0.0. I could have left the mask off in this case, since that would have been the default wildcard mask, but just out of habit, I like to do it anyway. I believe if we look at the config later, though, that mask would not appear. It would just say network 20.0.0. So far, so good. Now, IP default network, and it says address of default network, and that's it. You don't put a mask on it. It's classful, so the router's going to know what's going on there. And you just hit enter and you're off to the races. We hope. Now let's go down to router 2 and see what we have. And here is something might be a little new to you, a route with a code of D*. What are we so used to seeing from our CCNA studies? We're used to seeing an S*, right? You see it so many times that after a while, I think your subconscious just starts thinking that's the only kind of default route we have is a static default route. And as you can see here, that's not the case. Remember, the asterisk is by itself in the code table. It's not married to the letter S. You can have a candidate default route with any other of the dynamic routing protocols, either OSPF or EIGRP, the ones we use in this course, or the ones from other courses such as REP and IS to IS. Now, let's go up to router 1 and just do a quick show config. And I wanted to show you, don't be alarmed by this because that's a good practice exam question too. Hey, what happened to the wildcard mask I put in? If you put in the default mask for the network you entered, the mask may not show up in your iOS. May not. No big deal, but I wanted to point that out. Even though we entered 0, 255, 255, 255 here, it didn't show up in the config. Now I'm going to show you something, a bit of an iOS quirk that's really annoying. And this is off the record, if you will, and I am speaking directly into a microphone when I'm saying that, so it loses a little bit of its effect. What I mean to say is this is not going to be an exam topic, but you need to know about it. And I bumped into it when I was just running this command on a bunch of brand new routers with iOS 15. And of course, the theory of default network, IP default network, You advertise the route, you advertise the network, then you use IP default network, and your downstream router should see it, and then it should say gateway of last resort is, and it should give the next hop IP address, which in this case is 172.12.123.1, and to network, and then 20.0.0.0, whatever you used. So if I'm saying all this, you know the theory ain't always right, as I say on occasion. Well, a lot of people are bumping into an issue with this command in iOS 15, and again, I bumped into it just playing around with the new equipment and the new iOS we were using, and I was just doing the same command I've been using for 12 plus years at this point, and it just wasn't working as it always had. And I was going a little bit insane at one point, I don't mind saying, because it's like the network command suddenly not working under EIGRP. It's like, what's wrong with this thing? Well, what happened is, and what can happen, is that you do exactly what we did here, and you get the default route, the candidate default route here, and everything looks the same as it did on our router, our live routers, except it'll say gateway of last resort is not set. And that's the kind of thing, I'll say, well, I'll come back to that later and look at it and try to figure out what's going on. 2 minutes later, I'm right back at it because I can't let it go. But it was just crazy. And if you do a search on this, IP default network, iOS 15, anything like that, you will find some polite and a few not so polite conversations, as always, about, hey, I use this command and it doesn't work the same way it's always worked. So I'm hesitant to call it a bug, because I'm always hesitant to call anything a bug, but this just seems to be the way it's working in iOS 15, and I haven't seen any official explanation as to why. If you have, fantastic. I'm telling you this because if you bump into this in the real world, you know that you're not the only person it's happening to. If you get any questions on this command during your exam, go with the theory, go with the operation we saw here, because I did use one slightly older iOS version there on router 2. Router 1 was 15, we didn't have any problems. Just one of those things. But if you hit anything on the exam to do with IP default network, go with the theory, go with everything we saw here. But in the real world, I want you to know with iOS 15, it's a tad squirrely. Speaking of a tad squirrely, you're probably going a little squirrely with EIGRP right now, so I think we need to take a break from that. We do have other EIGRP topics to come. We've got authentication, we have named EIGRP, we have EIGRP for IP version 6 to go over, but we're going to do that in a later section. It's time to step away from EIGRP for a little bit and head into OSPF. That's the beginning of the very next section. A couple of videos, review and some theory there, and some heavy-duty labs with stubs, total stubs, not so stubs, all kinds of route types, and some OSPF labs I know you're going to enjoy. So take a little EIGRP breather, and I will see you at the beginning of the next section, and we'll hit OSPF.